The day I moved into my new home, I thought I had finally escaped the chaos of city living. Quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and a backyard that felt like my own little sanctuary. But it didn't take long before the dream started to unravel. Out of nowhere, the HOA began circling like vultures, letters stuffed in my mailbox, warnings pinned to my door, and fines that seemed to come from thin air. Each notice grew more absurd, more invasive, until it felt like they were determined to break me. But what they didn't expect was how far I'd go to fight back. When Michael and his wife finally moved into their new home, it felt like the end of a long journey. They had worked for years to escape the cramped apartment where every noise from the upstairs neighbors rattled their nerves. This house, tucked into a quiet suburban neighborhood, promised everything they had dreamed of. A spacious yard for their kids, enough land for a garden, and the kind of peace that made every hard-earned paycheck feel worthwhile. The first weeks were blissful. Mornings started with coffee on the porch, evenings ended with the children racing bikes down the cul-de-sac, and weekends were spent planting trees along the fence line. For the first time in years, Michael felt proud to invite family over. He could finally say he owned a home. At first glance, the community seemed welcoming. A few neighbors stopped by with baked goods, others waved politely from their driveways. There was a sense of order in the neighborhood, the kind you notice when lawns are evenly trimmed and mailboxes stand perfectly aligned. To Michael, it seemed like a good thing, a sign that people here cared about their homes. But beneath the surface, there was something else. The HOA, always present but invisible, had its grip tightly wrapped around every detail of life in the community. Rules weren't just rules here. They were enforced with an almost obsessive precision. The bylaws stretched across dozens of pages, covering everything from the color of porch lights to the height of grass blades. At first, Michael brushed it off. After all, he wasn't planning to push any boundaries. He just wanted a quiet life. Still, there were signs of tension. He noticed the way a neighbor's garage door stayed half-painted for weeks until suddenly the family moved out without warning. Another homeowner had their perfectly good fence replaced overnight, whispering about pressure from the board. Michael didn't think much of it until the first letter arrived in his mailbox. It was folded neatly, printed in crisp legal language, but its message was simple. The HOA was watching. And soon enough they would find a reason to make Michael their next target. The first letter seemed harmless enough. It was about the color of Michael's mailbox. Apparently, the soft charcoal he had chosen wasn't community standard. At first, he laughed it off. He figured it was some clerical mistake or an overzealous volunteer on the board. He wrote back politely, explaining that the color had been approved during his home inspection, and expected that to be the end of it. But it wasn't. 2 weeks later, another letter appeared, this one about his grass. According to the HOA, his lawn was inconsistent in shade and density. He stared at the paper in disbelief. He had spent countless evenings watering the grass, spreading fertilizer, and mowing on schedule. The lawn looked green, vibrant, alive. Yet somehow they had found a reason to call it unacceptable. Then came the fines. Small at first, $50 here, $75 there, but relentless. Each one came with a threat. If he didn't pay, legal action could follow. It wasn't just about money. It was the feeling of being hunted. The HOA wasn't correcting mistakes. They were manufacturing them. Michael began to notice strange behavior from the neighbors, too. One woman would pause on her morning walk to take pictures of his driveway. Another neighbor, who once waved hello, now stared coldly as he drove by. It was as if the entire community had been turned into watchdogs, waiting to report his every move. When he planted a small vegetable garden along the side of the house, another letter arrived. Unapproved landscaping. When his kids left their bikes leaning against the garage for an afternoon, he received a notice about unsightly clutter visible from the street. Even the wooden birdhouse his daughter built in school was flagged as an unapproved exterior modification. Every detail of his life was being scrutinized, judged, and punished. The emotional toll was crushing. Michael had bought the home to give his family peace, stability, a safe place to grow. But now, instead of joy, there was tension. His wife jumped at every knock on the door, afraid it was another notice. His kids asked why they couldn't play in the front yard anymore, worried that leaving a toy outside might cost their parents money. The house that was supposed to be a sanctuary had become a prison under constant surveillance. The worst came one Saturday morning. Michael walked out to find a bright orange tag hanging from his door, a violation warning for excessive noise. He froze. The night before, he and his family had been inside by 9, watching a movie. The neighborhood had been quiet. There hadn't been so much as a raised voice. But the HOA claimed they had received a complaint. That word, complaint, felt heavier than any fine. It meant someone had gone out of their way to lie, to target him deliberately. It wasn't just bureaucracy anymore. It was personal. Michael started digging into the HOA bylaws, hoping to find a loophole or mistake he could use to push back. But the deeper he went, the more he realized the system was designed to trap homeowners like him. The rules were vague on purpose, full of phrases like community standards and reasonable appearance, leaving all the power in the board's hands. They could twist the language to mean anything they wanted. And twist it, they did. The next violation was for parking. Michael's truck, which he had carefully backed into his own driveway, was suddenly in violation of neighborhood aesthetics. The letter claimed that larger vehicles created an industrial atmosphere inconsistent with the residential character of the community. It was absurd, but it came with a $200 fine. He appealed. He wrote a detailed letter, attached photographs, and sent it certified mail. For weeks, he waited. Then the response arrived. Appeal denied. Fine upheld. That's when the anger set in. This wasn't just incompetence, it was a campaign. Someone on the board had decided to make an example of him, and they weren't going to stop until he broke. The harassment escalated in ways both petty and cruel. The HOA suddenly demanded that he submit a maintenance plan for his front yard, including a schedule for watering, mowing, and trimming. When he complied, they rejected it, saying the format was not detailed enough. Another time, they accused him of leaving trash bins out too long, except the trash company hadn't even collected them that day due to a storm. It felt like gaslighting on a grand scale. Michael's family began to suffer. His wife grew anxious, her once bright personality dimming under the constant stress. His kids whispered about moving, afraid they were the reason for all the trouble. Every dinner conversation turned back to the HOA. Every mailbox check was filled with dread. And yet, the board members smiled in public. At community events, they acted like benevolent leaders, shaking hands and talking about upholding neighborhood values. To anyone outside Michael's home, it seemed like the HOA was just doing its job. But inside, the pressure was suffocating. One evening, Michael noticed something that chilled him. A car idled across the street, its headlights off, just sitting there. When he stepped outside, the car slowly drove away. It happened again a few nights later and again the week after that. Someone was watching his house. The message was clear. You don't control your life here. We do. But Michael wasn't the type to surrender. Every letter, every fine, every petty demand was fueling something inside him. Not fear, but resolve. He began to document everything. Photographs, timestamps, copies of every notice and appeal. He built a file thick with evidence, each page a record of the absurdity and abuse. Still, the harassment grew bolder. The HOA sent a notice threatening legal action over continued non-compliance. They claimed his unpaid fines had reached a level that justified a lien on his property. The thought of losing his home, the dream he had worked so hard for, was almost too much to bear. But then, something unexpected happened. As Michael stood at the mailbox one afternoon sifting through yet another notice, a neighbor he barely knew approached him. She glanced around nervously before speaking in a hushed voice. "You're not the only one," she said. Those 4 words changed everything. The breaking point came on a gray, rainy morning. Michael stepped outside to find a certified letter taped to his front door, sealed in plastic to keep it dry. The red letters across the top made his stomach twist. Notice of lien and foreclosure proceedings. The HOA had officially moved to seize his home. For a moment, the world went silent. He stood on his porch clutching the letter, rain dripping off his jacket, his heart pounding in disbelief. All the warnings, the fines, the endless harassment, they had finally escalated to the ultimate threat, taking away the very home he had fought so hard to provide for his family. Inside, his wife broke down. His kids huddled together on the couch, whispering questions he couldn't answer. The dream house, their sanctuary, now carried the weight of uncertainty and fear. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was the battlefield. And Michael knew the time for quiet compliance was over. For weeks, he had been gathering evidence, building a case brick by brick. Every letter, every absurd fine, every rejected appeal, he had documented it all. He had photographs of his perfectly manicured lawn, timestamps showing when his bins were collected, even videos proving that his so-called violations were fabricated. But what made his case unstoppable wasn't just the evidence. It was the neighbors. The same woman who had whispered, "You're not the only one," had connected him with others who had suffered under the board's iron grip. Families who had been bullied into silence, who had moved away, who had paid thousands just to be left alone. Some were too scared to speak up, but others were ready. And together, they gave Michael what he needed most: testimony. So when the HOA scheduled a mandatory board meeting to discuss his non-compliance, Michael didn't walk in alone. The clubhouse was packed. Board members sat in their usual row at the front, smug and polished, their expressions calm and rehearsed. They expected Michael to come in desperate, maybe begging for mercy. Instead, he carried a thick binder under his arm and walked straight to the front table. Behind him, a dozen neighbors filled the seats. Faces the board recognized, voices they thought they had silenced. When the president of the HOA began to speak, Michael raised his hand and interrupted. "Before you go any further," he said, his voice steady, "I have something the community needs to hear." He opened the binder. Page by page, violation by violation, he laid out the evidence. He showed photographs of his lawn on the very days he'd been fined. He held up the maintenance plan they had rejected, word for word compliant with their own bylaws. He played recordings of phone calls where board members gave contradictory instructions, proving their bad faith. Then came the testimonies. One by one, neighbors stood and shared their stories. Unreasonable fines, threats of legal action, intimidation tactics. Voices shook with emotion as they described being cornered, humiliated, and driven out of their own homes. The board's polished confidence began to crack. Faces tightened. The president shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted in Michael's favor. But the real blow was yet to come. Michael pulled out the final document, a letter from an attorney he had quietly consulted. It cited state law, statutes that limited the powers of HOAs, rules that the board had blatantly violated. The letter threatened a lawsuit for harassment, abuse of authority, and fraudulent fines. If the board pursued foreclosure, they wouldn't just lose in court, they could be held personally liable. The room went silent. The board president tried to regain control, insisting the meeting was not the proper forum for legal matters. But it was too late. The neighbors had seen the truth. The whispers of discontent that had lingered in private were now spoken aloud, impossible to contain. Then came the moment Michael would never forget. One neighbor, a soft-spoken retiree who had lived in the community for over 20 years, stood up and faced the board directly. "You've been bullying us for too long," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "It ends today." The room erupted in applause. The board, once untouchable, now sat cornered. Their authority, built on fear and silence, was crumbling in front of the very people they claimed to represent. In the days following that explosive meeting, the neighborhood felt different. The air was charged, no longer with fear, but with something that had been missing for years: defiance. For too long, the HOA board had ruled with quiet intimidation, hiding behind paperwork and bylaws. But now the spell was broken. Michael didn't have to say much in the aftermath. The binder of evidence and the testimonies from his neighbors spoke louder than any speech ever could. Rumors swirled quickly, about the financial discrepancies, about the board's overreach, about the possibility of lawsuits. For the first time, homeowners who had once avoided eye contact now stopped Michael in the street, thanking him for doing what no one else had dared. But victory didn't come overnight. The board, humiliated and exposed, tried to regain control. They sent out a letter to all residents, painting the meeting as a misunderstanding, and claiming Michael's accusations were unfounded. They warned against spreading misinformation, hoping to claw back some authority. But the damage was done. The same neighbors who once feared retaliation now had proof that the board could be challenged and beaten. Instead of retreating, they organized. A group of homeowners, emboldened by Michael's stand, demanded a recall vote. Petitions circulated from house to house, signatures piling up faster than anyone expected. People who had lived in silence for years were finally speaking out. The board fought back, of course. They argued that the petition was invalid, that the signatures didn't meet technical requirements. But with every excuse, their credibility crumbled further. When the local paper caught wind of the conflict, the story spread beyond the neighborhood. Suddenly, the board wasn't just facing angry homeowners, they were facing public scrutiny. And that was something they couldn't control. Within weeks, 2 board members resigned quietly, citing personal reasons. Another, the treasurer, vanished without explanation after residents began asking pointed questions about missing funds. The once unshakable leadership of the HOA fractured piece by piece, until only a shell remained. The foreclosure notice against Michael's home was formally withdrawn. The fines that had been piling up for months were voided, deemed improperly assessed. It was more than a personal victory. It was vindication. But Michael didn't stop there. With the help of his attorney and the support of his neighbors, he filed a formal complaint with the state agency that oversaw homeowner associations. He turned over every piece of evidence he had collected: the fabricated violations, the threats, the financial irregularities. What followed was an investigation that confirmed what everyone already suspected. The HOA board had abused its authority, mismanaged funds, and acted outside the bounds of the law. The fallout was swift. The board was dissolved, replaced by a new leadership committee elected by the homeowners themselves. This time, the people who stepped up weren't power-hungry bullies. They were parents, retirees, ordinary residents who wanted fairness, not control. Life in the neighborhood slowly began to heal. The letters stopped arriving. The petty surveillance ended. Children played in front yards without fear of triggering a fine. Families planted gardens, parked their cars, and decorated their homes without second-guessing every choice. For Michael and his family, the change was profound. The tension that had once hung over every dinner was gone. His wife laughed freely again. His kids reclaimed their sense of home, riding bikes and building forts in the yard without worry. And for Michael, the greatest reward wasn't the silence of the mailbox. It was the knowledge that he had protected not just his own home, but the homes of his neighbors as well. Still, the scars remained. The months of harassment had taken their toll, and the memory of that orange foreclosure notice would never fully fade. But those scars carried a lesson, a reminder that power left unchecked can become a weapon, and that standing up, even when it feels impossible, can change everything. In time, the story of Michael's fight became more than just neighborhood gossip. It spread to other communities, shared online, whispered among homeowners facing similar battles. People reached out to him, asking for advice, thanking him for showing that it was possible to resist. His binder of evidence, once a shield for survival, became a blueprint for others trapped in the same struggle. And that may be the greatest impact of all. Because this story isn't just about one man and one HOA. It's about a universal truth. When ordinary people find the courage to stand together, even the most oppressive systems can fall. Michael's victory didn't erase the past, but it built a future. A future where his children would remember not the fear of losing their home, but the strength of watching their father fight for it. A future where neighbors greeted each other, not with suspicion, but with solidarity. And perhaps most importantly, a future where the boardroom bullies who once thought themselves untouchable were forced to learn the one lesson they had tried hardest to bury. Power belongs to the people who refuse to give it away.